Welcome, everybody. My name is John T. Slater, and I will be leading this webinar. I'm hoping everybody can hear me clearly. If you have any technical problems at any time with being able to hear this webinar, it is going to be recorded, but also if a number of people have any issues, please let us know, and please use the Q&A on the chat to any inquiries you have. So this isn't a webinar that we have been planning for a number of months, actually, because we've been really focused on how can we talk about scaling up of innovations in low, middle-income countries in a way that actually talks to everybody who actually will benefit from this conversation. I'm going to turn my camera on just for a moment so that you actually can see who's actually talking to you. So welcome, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. So this webinar will last about an hour and a half, and let me just talk you through the agenda. So we're going to do a welcome and some introductions to a program called Afri-Plastics, which is what this relates to and what we'll be talking about. Then we have a really interesting report that is coming out on scaling innovations, and the author will be talking about some of the conclusions that have come from that report. Then we're going to have a panel discussion on experiences of successfully scaling innovations in Africa and other low and middle income countries. And then we have a chance of some Q&A, and then we'll have some closing remarks, and we should finish in about the next hour and a half. So I'm going to just keep going. We have a good number of people already on the list, so in the room, so let's keep going. So these are who you're going to hear from today. My name is John T. Slater. I'm the Director for International Development at Challenge Works. And then you're going to hear from Esther, who's the Head of Research at StateUp, and my colleague Theodora, who is going to be leading the panel. And then you can see who are panel discussions, and you're going to be introduced to them, and you will hear all from them in about half an hour's time. So welcome. So I'm talking on behalf of Challenge Works. We are a not-for-profit organization that is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nesta. Nesta is the UK's foundation for social good. It's trying to work and trying to solve social issues around the world, focused from the UK, but also globally. Challenge Works, we design and run innovation challenges, which is a very specific modality of open innovation. We're trying to solve complex problems in a unique and individual way that inspires people to participate in it. We've been going for about 10 years now, and we've run over 87 prizes now, and we have awarded over $225 million. So what is an innovation prize? What is a challenge prize? These are a type of open innovation competition. The aim is to reward the person who achieves, or the organization that achieves or most effectively meets a defined challenge. They're very usually problem focused or focused on solving a particular outcome. They're usually open to anybody around the world, and the aim is to really engage with the entrepreneurs, the innovators who are able to solve the problems within different people around the world, and focusing on what clients want to solve. So why do organizations run a challenge prize? Usually they run it because they are trying to solve something. They're trying to bring new people in to solve a problem. It's usually where other people have been trying to solve this problem before, haven't made it successfully, or they want to inspire new people to bring it in. They also want to bring in and ask innovators to actually be able to have a supportive process, something that they actually can benefit from, even if they don't win. Even if they aren't the person that solves the problem, they will actually be able to be able to get something out of it so that actually we stimulate people to be able to think about the next problem they may want to solve. But the aim real is to unlock systemic change. Really, how are we going to ask people to actually solve a problem that look at from a policy or a regulatory point of view to actually change things so that actually people can innovate and can be entrepreneurs all around the world where they could do. What we're trying to do is actually solve big issues. Now, the reason that this webinar is being run is because we're an evidence-based, practice-based organization. What we're trying to do is actually look and publish reports about how well we have actually been doing our job of actually running these challenges. Are these challenges actually successful? Not just because we think they could be successful, but actually, are they being successful? And the aim of all of this webinar is actually to say, is that something that people are interested in? And actually, can we stimulate people to think about innovation in different ways? And especially for this webinar, scaling innovation. So we actually engage with researchers and stakeholders to actually engage with us in terms of how we can bring in experts, but other end users who can possibly help us, who could be possibly enter the prizes and actually look at the barriers that are stopping those problems being solved that we talked about earlier. How can we develop these programs to be able to create and incentivize participation? We then look at how to build these programs to be able to provide capacity support, and can this be used to create impactful solutions? And then can we then have independent monitoring and evaluation and learning of these programs? Can we gather information and can we actually respond back to people in a positive way and share what we learn? Now, we have worked with people all over the world. We're a UK-based organization, but we work globally. The program that you are going to hear about, Afri-Plastics, we talk about, was funded by Global Affairs Canada, but also we have programs that are funded by USAID and also private organizations, private foundations like Toyota Mobility or JP Morgan. We do programs with the UK government, but also with the UNDP, and programs with private foundations like the Foundation Botnar Foundation. So we've worked with places all over the world, and we work on everything from health problems to technical issues to how to solve people moving around a city to how to reduce the impact of dementia on communities. And we have partners also around the world, so from the Royal Academy of Engineering to Afri-Labs to Proportion Global to Circle Innovation to the Science Museum in the UK to the Centre for Public Impact. These are all organizations that we work with to deliver our programs. So I really want to focus you for a moment on Afri-Plastics Challenge. So this was a program that was funded by the Government of Canada under the Global Affairs Canada, and it was part of their Litter Mitigation Fund. And this ran between 2020 and 2023. And the aim was to reduce marine plastics in sub-Saharan Africa by actually seeing if people could build businesses or scale existing businesses to solve the problem and address plastic mismanagement around sub-Saharan Africa. We had a real strong focus that we wanted to do is focus on gender equality. Can you scale? Can you replicate? And can you adopt new innovations? And can you leverage investment into these new markets? So out of that all, the amazing team here at ChallengeWorks broke the challenge down into 3 separate strands. Strand 1 was about scaling, and that's what we're going to be the focus of a lot of our conversations today. So can you accelerate existing businesses and can you ask them to scale? The second one we looked at is, can you stimulate people to come up with new ideas to this problem? Can you ask them to start up a business in a particular area? And the final one was actually, can you cause organizations to actually want to create campaigns? This is really clear in terms of sometimes a business thinks about it purely from, can you have customers? But sometimes we actually also need to think about the communities we're going to work with, and can we create behavior change? as you can see, we had a large number of organizations enter into the challenge. If you look at that, that's over nearly 1,200 different types of organization, businesses, and individuals wanted to enter into the program. And we had to, over the course of the 2.5 years that the program ran, we had to select down to 9 winners, which is actually quite a hard process to go through, but actually it was something that we were really critical. One of the outcomes of all of this was some really interesting data that we were able to collect. So can you scale? Now, we set ourselves a target that 100% of all of our participants, all of our finalists, would actually be able to scale. We actually got to 67% of the target, which is actually not bad, taking businesses that are maybe only processing 10 or 20 tons of plastic a month to 250 tons of plastic a month. That still means that we were able to increase these organizations go to 10 times over the course of 1 year, being able to scale their businesses. For the businesses that created new ideas, 100% came from an initial idea and became a business and went to market. And actually 92% of the programs that actually entered our semi-finalist and finalist stage for our campaigns for our Strand 3 actually entered the market with their idea in the 1 year that we ran this program and the 1 year process that we monitored them all for. Now, we also wanted to look at gender equality and empowerment of girls. And we wanted to really stimulate women to be able to enter this process. And you'll see why when we talk from our panel is bringing women into this whole process is actually quite hard sometimes in terms of can we stimulate the environment? And actually, you are going to hear from quite a majority male panel, but that isn't because women aren't in this. It's just because they're actually doing it in a different way. And sometimes trying to get them to speak about it is actually a lot harder. So we actually had nearly 50% of the businesses that worked in Thing were women-led organizations in our scaling. But actually, in our new ideas, over 70% were finalists and 67% were in the winners. And in terms of the campaigns, that was purely led by women in terms of the winners that we provided. And one of the things that we really wanted to do is increase the knowledge within all of the organizations, the value of women and girls do and how they can be brought into the plastic value chain. So one of the final outcomes that I want to talk to you all about is actually leveraging investment, because actually none of this works. You can't scale a business without actually bringing in investment. And how many organizations actually brought in money as part of the process, and that was one of the key things when we designed the Afri-Plastics challenge, was actually that bringing in investment was really key. And you can bring in it all at the different stages, and we can send you more information about this after the fact. And as you can see, for Strand 1, for the scaling, we started out with organizations, our semi-finalist organizations from East and West Africa and Southern Africa. And that still stayed when we had the finalists, with a large number of organizations coming from Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, South Africa, DRC, Rwanda. And amazingly, the organization that won our £1 million grand prize was from Togo. And GIP Togo were an organization that actually really scaled their business. So I've just given you a lot of background on Challenge Works, on the Afri-Plastics challenge, and some of the work that we've done now. What I'd really like now to do is to hand over to my colleague to speak about, to Esther, to speak about our Scaling Innovation Prize, the report that we delivered. And Esther, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonty. If we could jump to the next slide. Fantastic. So my name is Esther Tibor, and as Jonty mentioned, I am head of research at StateUp, at a global research and advisory organization. And it is such a pleasure to be here today and to tell you about this report that I worked on with colleagues from StateUp, but then also in very close collaboration with researchers at ChallengeWorks, where we were focusing on the Afri-Plastics challenge from various perspectives, really. And I'm really looking forward to giving you basically a whistle-stop tour of this report that you will also be able to access in its entirety following the webinar. And then also to join a panel of fantastic leaders and experts in this space to discuss this topic in even more detail. So if we could go to the next slide, I would like to begin by thanking all the people that contributed to this report. All the insights, lessons, and experiences that are distilled in this report are based on a number of interviews, almost 30 interviews that we conducted. These interviews were with innovators who participated in the Afri-Plastics Challenge, many of them participants in the Strand 1, focused on scaling. We also spoke to delivery partners who were engaged with all of the innovators, giving them the background, giving them the support that they needed to progress through this challenge. And then we spoke to many of the judges for the Afri-Plastics Challenge, who are all renowned experts and very important stakeholders in the African plastic and social innovation space. Finally, we also spoke to experts across our own network and from ChallengeWorks, spanning academia, practice, and regulation as well, to get a very comprehensive view of, what does it mean to scale innovations, especially in a setting that is as complex as the Afri-Plastics Challenge context was. So before I jump into, telling you all about what we found out about barriers and opportunities, I actually want to take a moment to reflect on the context and how that influences the way we think about scaling. Because, of course, as many of you on this call know, the way we think about scaling in the typical, kind of more narrow, kind of entrepreneurial business management literature, we tend to think about it in terms of persistent and rapid organizational growth, focusing on, a number of key metrics, key to the organization, key to business outcomes. But then, hearing Jonty's description of the Afri-Plastics Challenge, you all must realize that the problem that innovators were trying to solve here was a lot broader than could be captured in narrow sales or profit outcomes. It very much had a social component, it very much had an environmental component. So we started looking more broadly at definitions of scaling, including from scaling social innovations. And we found excellent definitions, but many of them focused on beneficiaries quite narrowly, beneficiaries in terms of people who are recipients of the program. But then the Afri-Plastics program very much included nature, environment, the planet as a beneficiary. And it also considered a specific route to impact. It looked at social enterprises or profit-oriented enterprises who were working in a space, doing really good job, but maybe their business model wasn't sustainable, or it didn't allow them to grow from tackling this challenge on a smaller scale to growing to a larger scale. So with all of this in mind, we came up with the following definition of what we actually mean by scaling in this context, which you can see on the next slide. So in our context, we think about scaling as achieving a set of conditions. These conditions range from organizational form, size of organization, capacity, capabilities, but also business model, partnerships and networks, capital and finance, that allow organizations to unlock efficiencies, and they allow sustainable delivery of plastic waste management solutions in a way that is both socially and environmentally responsible. So this is the backdrop. This is what we're after. This is the kind of scaling that we are looking for. And now, what stands in the way of organizations to scale this way? Our interviews uncovered a set of barriers. Next slide, please. And these barriers really range from barriers specific to the organization to barriers that are infrastructural and that are institutional. The first category includes access to all kinds of resources, it includes access to financial capital, physical capital, human capital, but also social capital. And in our context, we heard from many innovators around, how crucial access to financial capital was. One innovator told us that their perception was banks are not running to give money to smaller businesses. And then private investors who might be interested, they may want to take, their social purpose organization in directions that they may not feel comfortable with. So they felt a bit stuck in terms of accessing the finance that they needed. But then there was also the question of social capital, of access to networks. Some people put it, people that I tend to know, they are in the same position as I am. They are in the same situation as I am. I need a broader network. I need to be able to talk to peers who can tell me about their experiences that might be different from mine. And something that was interesting to see was how these organizational barriers often affect women entrepreneurs, women-led businesses even more due to a number of underlying, cultural and, other kind of system level reasons. Now, what is quite specific, I think, to the plastic management space is how important infrastructural barriers might be. And over the course of our investigation, we found that very often the broader waste management system, waste management infrastructure was underdeveloped. We have seen instances where, there was either no or very limited sorting at the source. This meant that, collection and then recycling had to deal with potentially contaminated, dirty waste, making it a lot more difficult to process. And finally, we also heard about a lot of the kind of broader institutional barriers that would include things from, from regulation to markets to kind of cultures and norms. And a good example came from one of our judges who described this situation where she said, we really need an enabling environment. And what we have instead is an environment where the regulation may be complex. Budding entrepreneurs may need to deal with a lot of different institutions, a lot of different levels of the government might be involved. There might be either high or duplicate fees. And the way she put it, she said, these entrepreneurs, their wings are clipped before they even begin by the regulatory environment. So against these challenges, what are ways forward? Next slide, please. So what we have seen in the course of studying the Afri-Plastics challenge and the participating innovators, it very much mapped onto these concepts from the social innovation literature that I found really fascinating. This idea of different types of scaling and the success really happening at the kind of intersection of different kinds of scaling. And the way it is often described is in terms of scaling out, up, and deep. Out in terms of the conventional, increasing your reach, increasing the number of people or localities that are impacted. Scaling up in terms of changing the system, changing the regulation, changing your kind of broader environment. And then scaling deep, and this is the part around changing hearts and changing minds. And we have seen all of these strategies in practice through the Afri-Plastics challenge. In terms of scaling out, I mean, Jonty gave you this very, very good example at the very beginning of the number of participants or the share of participants who were able to increase the amount of waste that they processed per month. But we've also seen kind of scaling out also in terms of localities, opening new sites, going into new locations, experimenting with new business models. And then in terms of scaling up, this is something that we'll come back to on the next slide as well, but a really important part for many of the participating entrepreneurs was their ability to forge partnerships, forge connections with their broader system and to develop networks also into government and regulation. They have seen their ability to talk to the local municipality, but also to kind of country level, like ministerial level contacts. It really increased through participation in this program. And they were able to shape their environment in a way that would be a lot more enabling, a lot more business friendly. And in terms of scaling deep, there were multiple examples of how these innovators, they kind of worked with their community, worked with other organizations around them to change culture, to change minds. And there are at least two aspects in which this happened. And one was, as Jonty mentioned, this was very much a focus for the prize. One was around empowering women and girls. A lot of the organizations went from considering this as providing employment to women to considering the quality of that employment, to considering, women's place in, decision-making structures. And then the other side that was also very much represented was how they thought about, plastic waste management more holistically. A lot more considerations to kind of circular economy principles, a lot more considerations to end of life. So you have really seen all of these play out at once. And I'm going to end on a specific mechanism that I thought was really interesting to observe. Next slide, please. And this was something that turns out to be a very important lever that challenge prizes can employ if they want to aid innovators, entrepreneurs in their scaling journey. And this is the provision of visibility, the provision of endorsement. Essentially, the innovators that we spoke to, they had this strong stance that they had a spotlight that was shining on them. And these are not only the winners, these are also finalists, and in some instances, semi-finalists, who were mentioning that participating in this challenge just brought this additional boost to their credibility and to their visibility. And we had examples of how this translated into new customers, to the point where new customers reached out to them, often international customers, because they had heard about them through Challenge Prize participation. It also led to an improved relationship with suppliers. They were now considered a more serious player, or their social innovation credentials were now also more visible. And as I mentioned before, it made it easier for them to work with local municipalities to access public procurement contracts, but then also to make connections on the ministerial level and be consulted and shape regulation through those consultations. Now, this was a really, really quick summary. If you could move to the final slide, please. So I hope that this was enough to spark your attention, spark your interest enough that you're going to take a look at the report, which contains a lot more details. And at the Q&A, feel free to ask any follow-up questions. Alternatively, you can reach me through a number of different channels that are listed here, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. And I would love to connect and talk more in detail. So thank you very much.
Esther, thank you so much for that. That was really, really helpful. I'm now going to hand over, and yes, the report that Esther has mentioned will be sent via email to you at the end of this webinar, and also we'll be sharing a recording as well. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Theodora, who is going to be able to talk to you about all of our panelists. So Theodora, I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonty, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you are calling from the globe. So my name is Theodora Kish, and I'm a researcher at ChallengeWorks. I have to admit, I'm really excited about this panel discussion because the Afri-Plastics Challenge holds a quite special place in my heart. It's actually been the first project I worked on when I joined ChallengeWorks. We spent half a year doing really intense research and design work. I've been following it very eagerly throughout the delivery. And then I actually had the pleasure to work together with Esther on the report that you just heard about. And thank you again, Esther, for putting together and leading this research. I think you've really helped us articulate a lot of the lessons that we've kind of gained throughout these years with these experiences of running the Afri-Plastics Challenge, as well as other programs. So I think it's actually quite rare to have the opportunity to take a step back and look at lessons learned from the programs that we've been implementing. It definitely has to happen more often in our space. I think everyone agrees on that. And I actually think this panel that we put together is a great opportunity to do so. So we have, I think, really great range of profiles here that are going to provide us with a lot of insights. And without further ado, I will maybe hand it over to them to introduce themselves. So perhaps I'm going to start with Isaac. Isaac, could you tell us a bit about your own experience in the innovation, in particular scaling innovation space?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Good morning. My name is Isaac Sessi. I am from Ghana, and I lead a private organization called Sessi Technologies that develops affordable technology solutions for farmers and agribusinesses. And actually, the way I got into this space was through my work as a research engineer in my former university, where my research involved working with a team of researchers, scientists, and engineers to develop a low-cost solution to post-harvest losses, specifically the development, specifically a way for farmers to be able to easily measure the moisture content in their grains. And so I worked to design a low-cost grain moisture meter, which eventually which did very well. And then the next step was, instead of it to just lie on the shelf as research, actually commercialize it and scale it up. So I set up my company, Sessi Technologies, to scale this post-harvest innovation. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we have been working in several smallholder farmer value chains within and outside of Ghana to understand the problem of post-harvest losses and to scale this innovation. Along the line, we realized that the problem of being able to solve the moisture problem associated with grains goes beyond just being able to develop a solution to measure moisture content. So part of the whole process involved understanding the entire value chain and looking at what were the barriers to adoption of technology and innovation and trying to overcome those challenges. And that is what my work has been focused on over the last 5 years. And I look forward to sharing more of that.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I think we're going to have a lot to learn from your experience working directly with farmers and as end users and actually commercializing such a solution. Maybe I will move over to Oliver. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Theodore. Thanks for that. My name is Oliver. I'm one of the founders of Afri-Plastics Technologies. We are a social enterprise that enables rural and peri-urban communities to recycle plastic waste at source through a micro-recycling pod that we've developed. We have a range of 3 different pods. And what these allow communities to do is to actually run a plastic recycling business where they can actually process the materials at source, upcycle it to a higher value. And something we're very proud of as we've scaled our business across South Africa and into Africa is the ability to actually drive value back down the value chain to the communities, whilst also creating a superior logistical solution for our uptake agreements and partners.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Sounds like you also have a lot of really hands-on experience in this space. Maybe we could now hear from Gidibo, if you would like to introduce yourself for the audience.
Thank you, Theodore. My name is Gidibo Tindwa. I'm based out of Dar es Salaam, and I'm part of the network of angel investors called WV Angels. My work spans across doing a lot of diligence work around startups and scaling innovations. And I love the report that Esther just shared, because it talks a lot about the different types of innovations and how scaling can be totally different. And it's not a blue script process where you do 1, 2, 3, and then you can achieve scaling. So again, understanding the different definitions of scaling in the context of the specific business that you're trying to expand would really, really impact the approach you take, but also the different metrics you build around what you would call successful scaling, or what would you define as a failure in that matter. So I'm happy to share more as we have this conversation, but happy to listen to learn from other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gidibo. I have to say, I think it's really exciting to have someone from the investing space here. I feel like that's always a bit of a dream for us working in the nonprofit international development space. So it's absolutely great to have you here today. And finally, I will hand over to Ijudai. I believe you're still online. Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Morning, afternoon, and good evening all. I'm Ijudai Jasada. I work with International Livestock Research as a senior scaling and innovation expert, where I work with other CGIAR research centers to scale up some of the innovations that we have across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the CGIAR is a consortium of agricultural research institutes, and part of what we do is to see that we address issues around food insecurity by improving food systems in the global south. So my work looks at the various innovations that are coming out from the innovators that we have within the research institutes, to help them build and develop those innovations to a level where they are scaling ready before we institute a scaling strategy and work with partners out there to adopt these innovations. I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to a fruitful conversation.
Thank you so much, Ijudai. Likewise, I feel like I already have a lot of questions from you and would love to dig on into your experience. Just wanted to flag that we are going to have 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So for everyone in the audience, please feel free to drop any questions to our panelists, and we will make sure to cover as many as we can. Esther, I left you for last for a specific reason. In particular, I wanted to maybe open with a question for yourself. So something that we've been hearing more and more in the past years is about how we really don't want innovations to just be a one-off. We want them to be sustained, scale up, and therefore reach their full impact. How do you actually measure this long-term impact? I think especially if we're talking about complicated projects like the Afri-Plastics challenge, where I think you very well highlighted that we're looking at different environmental, social, and economic impacts that are all very intricately intertwined.
Thank you very much. And you're right that the measurement part is definitely really close to my heart. This is kind of my original route into innovation research was through, kind of measuring the impact of programs, initiatives, policies. And this is something that we thought about a lot also in the context of the report. This idea of how can we come up with measurable objectives for this project, and how can they reflect both the desire to be specific, but then also the need to be broad and all-encompassing for such a complex project. And the first thing that we had to acknowledge was this sort of tension that certain outcomes are just inherently easier to turn, to translate into a measurable, quantifiable outcome, and these tend to be the economic ones. So in the context of the Afri-Plastics challenge, this would be the target of 250 tons processed or recycled or collected. And this is one that is great to have, and it focuses you and it inspires you and it holds you accountable. But then it is very difficult to kind of at the same time not let this kind of steal the limelight away from all the other considerations that were also super central to this project. that were related to empowerment of women, and then also delivering these solutions in ways that are truly good for the planet. And I think that what we have come up with, also when it comes to, how do we track impact over long time, is to focus on evaluation with, like taking our theory of change seriously. So having a really good model of what is our route to impact, what should happen at each stage, what should happen immediately, what should happen over the midterm, what should happen over the long run, also with a clear sense of who should be doing what, so we can track almost like how are we looking as we are going towards those broader, longer term outcomes. Are the things that need to happen along the way, can we see them materialize in the closer term? So if we would like to embed lasting change, do we already now at the end of the program see new partnerships formed? Do we see new routes to accessing finance? Do we see new conversations beginning that are going to shape the broader regulation, etc.? So I think both a need to acknowledge that, yes, this is tricky. Yes, we should also make sure that, as we are designing programs, as we are designing initiatives, enough money goes to impact assessment, also longer term. And then the part around understanding the route to impact, and then having kind of step-by-step measures to see, are we on track?
Thank you so much, Esther. I feel like this is a really helpful kind of best practice lesson for all of the practitioners in the room. It's really complicated to think about all of these things from the very start of the program. I think as we've learned ourselves with the Afri-Plastics challenge, but it is quite key. I would like to maybe now pick up on Gidibo and Ijudai. I think you've both had your own experiences with looking at existing innovations and identifying which are the most impactful potentially, or the ones that are most likely to scale and have legs in the future. Can you tell us a bit about how you look at this long-term scaling up potential perspective?
Okay, so for us within the CG, we have developed this framework that helps us to look at our innovations closely in order to identify the scaling potential and the readiness of these innovations to scale. So basically what we do is to first test these innovations, conduct some pilot studies around scaling these innovations to see what are the impacts that can be obtained from those pilot phases. And if we're able to deduce that, we subject that innovation to the innovation packages and scaling framework, which helps us to identify if this innovation is ready to scale. If it's ready to scale, then we look at what is feasible in terms of bundling this
Oh, Ijudai, I think you broke off. Either that or it's on my side.
No, Theodora, you're fine.
I feel like the challenges of online meetings should be the topic of their own report when it comes to international collaboration. Well, oh, Ijudai, I think you're back. You disappeared for a moment.
Yeah, I might have to turn off my video. I think my bandwidth is low. So
No
like
worries.
I was sharing, yes. So we use that to build that innovation, bundle it with other complementary innovations to make it sustainable. And because we work closely with innovators, we try as much as possible to identify scaling partners that will be able to mainstream these innovations to reach the early majority and the late majority within the target populations that we are focusing. And to improve sustainability, we provide certain capacity development training to the scaling partners and empower them with the necessary knowledge and skills about that innovation to carry it forward and introduce it to the various mainstream actors that we are targeting. And in terms of measuring long-term impact, we basically adopt a rigorous monitoring and evaluation mechanism, tracking outcomes related to livestock health, the social and economic benefits of the innovation and the environmental sustainability. And something I forgot to mention also is at the stage of packaging that innovation, we do conduct a trade-off research to know what are some of those trade-off outcomes that can come out of scaling that innovation, and what sort of mitigation plans can we put in place to address those trade-offs that could come up that are undesirable. Over.
Thank you so much for this really detailed overview. Yeah, I think similar to Esther's answer, I think this also helps paint a picture of how complex it is to actually account for long-term impacts. Gidibo, I don't know if you had something to share on this. I would be really curious about your perspective as an impact investment specialist.
Thank you, Theodore. I think this is a really interesting conversation, and it really opens up the door towards the different approaches that as investors look at when deciding on investments. There are different facets or different dynamics that really drive the decision-making process in terms of an investment. And as different panelists here have contributed already, the different dynamics that affect these investment and how you approach scaling. And in this case, the investors also look at what are those definitions and how can you successfully scale a business model and innovation in a way that is, you know, socially responsible, but at the same time has financial viability for the business itself. And so, you know, the financial viability, in most cases, people think investors only look for the financial outcomes, but that's not the case all the time. And I can give you an example. We are looking at a business at the moment where we have almost 2 or 3 competing investors wanting to come in. One investor has a lower financial commitment that they want to bring in, and the other investor has a bigger, financial stake that they want to take. From a business perspective, it's easier to jump on board with the bigger investment and say, oh, we want to, raise this much money. So this bigger investor is much more profitable for us. But on the other side, there's the smaller financial investment partner that is coming in, brings in a social component. They can open up, other innovations or other ways that other investors can come in. For example, in this case, this investor with a lower financial benefit comes in with opening up the wider market in terms of the business. So they may be investing smaller amount, but their investment opens up the business to a newer, bigger market that can help them expand in the long run. So, the decision-making process might seem in the long run, we're getting on board an investor that is putting lower numbers, but in the long run, thinking of the business model expansion, you're looking at a potential to a whole new, different market segment that you were not able to touch in previously. So again, I like the conversation on the report that Esther talked about scaling up, scaling out, and scaling deep. So understanding those would really, really help you also make the decision, what type of investor or partnership do I want to bring on board? Do they support my long-term objectives as a business, or do they support my financial objectives immediately? I will stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Gidibo. This is really interesting. I would now like to maybe zoom in a bit away from this long-term impact perspective, and actually want to ask Oliver and Isaac to talk a bit about their very hands-on experience scaling specific innovations. So Isaac, you worked with farmers. Oliver, you worked with rural and peri-urban communities. And something that we've been hearing more and more in the past years as well is that one of the key ingredients to scaling innovations in low and middle income countries is to ensure that they are actually highly tailored to the local context and culture. We don't want them to be just a replication of the same models from high income countries. Can you tell us a bit about your own experiences with scaling innovations and the role that kind of accounting for and doing this deep tailoring to the local context was actually an important challenge?
All right, let me start with my experience. So for us, we do a lot of stakeholder engagements to understand the true needs of the people that we are developing for, because coming from like a formal research background, you go in with certain assumptions, and then you go to the field and then you realize that your assumptions are not valid. And so in order to prevent us from building things that people don't need and people don't want, we actually go speak with the farmers and the people that we want to develop the innovation for, that we want to scale the innovation to. So with our grain moisture meter, for instance, we actually went to 37 different smallholder farmer communities, spoke to more than 700 farmers in like different focus groups, just to understand the needs across board. And in Ghana, and I'm sure in other parts of Africa, even some of the practices that happen, say in the middle of Ghana, are different from the farming practices that happen even in the north of Ghana, which is still the same country. And so you have to like consider all of that. You also have to look at things like we have to look at things like what are the constraints from a technology point of view, from an education point of view. We understand that some of the farmers have very limited education, and so the technology would have to be simple enough for them to be able to use, and even how willing are they to pay for the technology, and that informs the business model. So if this is a product, is helpful, but the farmers are not very willing to pay for it, or are not very able to pay for us low cost enough so farmers can afford, or how do we bundle this with another solution that the farmers appreciate more? So in our case, we realized that even though moisture meters were great and would solve the moisture problem issue, farmers didn't care enough about it. But we introduced hermetic storage bags, and farmers were really excited about the bags because they could see the tangible benefits that they would get from being able to store their grains for long and not have insects eat all of the grains. And so we bundled the bags and the meters, and it was like the model to which we were able to deliver that. So if we were going to just adopt or replicate a model from, say, the West, we would have built this highly sophisticated grain moisture meter and say farmers should pay us $200 or $300 to purchase a meter. But just going from the point of view of understanding what the needs of the farmers were, even though we knew they needed a meter, we realized that they didn't care enough about a meter to be willing to pay for it, but then they appreciated hermetic bags more. So a lot of stakeholder engagement and just trying to understand the real problems they faced, and then the constraints towards the action of any innovation led us to really develop a solution that was tailored for their context.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Oliver, I'm curious if this resonates with your own experience.
Thanks, Theodore and Isaac. Yeah, so I think in our experience, local is king, and localization is key. Basically, we look very closly at stakeholder engagement at a community level, as well as at a governmental level. So for us, it's very important to engage with all the different parties around a community when we're going to deploy one of our microrecycling pods. We obviously are very cognitive of the fact that every area, it doesn't matter where you are across our continent and across the world, is, you know, local cultures, customs, and ways of doing stuff, consumer patterns, etc., vary. And one thing we focus very heavily on is the localized partnering, you know, making sure we've got the right key partners in place to help us implement partnerships, who we should be talking to, be it an NGO or MPO or a government agency that will help us to actually enhance that value proposition. And then obviously, you know, in terms of what problem are you solving within the community? How are you adding value to that community? You know, in our case, we monetize plastic waste at source, so the community can actually sell their plastic locally rather than having to take it into the city or wait for somebody to come and fetch it, but also in terms of increasing the value of that material by actually upcycling it. So for example, our plants shred, wash, and granulate the plastic so that it's densified and clean, and obviously we are then able to get a higher price for that. And then thirdly, just to sort of wrap up from our side, the other key thing in terms of localization is understanding the restrictions and limitations of your local application, in terms of, it could be power restrictions. You know, we've had to learn how to adapt the power feeds to our plants in terms of, can they be run on solar, can they be run on generators, can they be run manually? You know, as a project we're currently looking at where it doesn't actually require any form of power source. And we've invested very heavily over the last sort of 18 to 24 months around simplification of operation. You know, literally, when the red light goes green, you can use the machine. Track and trace technology. How do we help the community track and trace the plastic they're collecting and monetize that effectively? Again, simplification of the process as much as possible, and very much always having open ears and listening to the community.
Thank you so much, Oliver. That makes me think of the broader debate around frugal innovation or informal innovation. And I think it is probably time for funders to recognize that actually doing innovation in resource-constrained settings is as much of a challenge and as much innovation as some of the sexier high-tech initiatives that we see elsewhere. So it's great to hear about your very concrete example. And something that you actually said earlier prompted my next question. You asked, how do you solve the problem for the community? And I think something we've been observing is that very often in these programs, you have a lot of priorities and goals that are held by different stakeholders. Communities have their own problems that they want solved. The innovators want to strengthen and scale their businesses. We have governments, we have donors, we have a whole constellation of stakeholders. And I think all the practitioners here in the room probably have some experience with how actually complicated it is to navigate all of these priorities. And this is a question open for the entire panel. Do you have any nuggets of wisdom about how to actually navigate the complexities of working in these very challenging multi-stakeholder groups? Gidibo, thank you for raising your hand.
Thank you. I love this part because I think it's really interesting, and I think just to respond to your question, it's also, I think it adds on to understanding your, and I'll speak from my perspective of a funder. It adds to understand, it gives so much value to understand your own biases as you navigate these spaces. So again, sometimes you have so many stakeholders to get involved, to update, to make sure that they're on board, and it's really important to make sure that you're able to align the primary objectives of each stakeholder. So if it's engaging the community, engaging the government, even within, in the context of, let's say, working with the government in a local context, you also want to understand the different priorities from the individuals that are leading the lead contact from the government side, and trying to incorporate those priorities within the project, the scaling plan that you're trying to achieve. Because once you miss out on some of these dynamics, it's so risky, and you might end up running into a hurdle that was unnecessary and could have been avoided had it been planned along the way. And again, I love this previous conversation where we talk about, as investors, we always talk about context is king, understanding the local context, understanding the local problems, and trying to make sure that you incorporate the solutions of the local community within the solutions that you're trying to bring in board. So having those parameters as you're thinking through the business model, thinking through the different metrics of how you're going to say we're being successful or not, is really, really important, and making sure that everybody on the ground is kept involved from the startup to all the way to when you're starting to scale up, because then there's more ownership of the program, but there's more involvement with the community, and they feel like they have a word or a voice within the project and the scaling up model. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this perspective. Ijudai, over to you.
Okay, just to build up on what Tindor had talked about, we all know that in Africa, we encounter a complex web of stakeholders, from local governments, farming communities, to businesses and NGOs. And these are some of the stakeholders we work with, especially when we want to scale up innovation. And as a first step to really understanding this stakeholders, we normally conduct research to build up a stakeholder register around the innovations. Who are the stakeholders that could be relevant to scaling this innovation? Where are their priorities? What are their needs and all that? And for the local organizations like the public sector, we try as much as possible to identify complementary programs that they have that could, complement that innovation, so that when we engage with them and we have a very interesting value proposition to these stakeholders that we want to talk to. And we try as much as possible to see how we can build trust through transparent communication and collaboration with most of these organizations. For the local actors that we work closely with, especially those working within the agricultural ministries like extension agents and all that, we engage them to be part of the project, give them responsibilities so that they have that sense of ownership and belonging within that project. And within communities, we try as much as possible to design a community entry strategy where we work with some of the local actors and key decision makers within the public sectors that can help introduce us to the community, where we present that innovation and get their feedback so that they are fully involved within the decision-making processes, because these interventions have great potential to affect their communities. And as part of our scaling up plan, most often we try as much as possible to work with private actors, where we empower them and see that they take up the scaling of this innovation forward. So as a guide, what we normally do is to map the stakeholders, do a need assessment, define our community entry strategy and implement it. And then we work with the relevant key stakeholders to build that sense of partnership and the community work together. Over.
Thank you so much for this, Ijudai. Well, actually, I think this whole conversation about stakeholders has made me think about a quite burning question that I have, and maybe I will direct it first to Oliver. We talk about a lot of different types of stakeholders, but Esther, I think, mentioned in her presentation that sometimes the environment is also a stakeholder. How do you account for that, especially in the context of low and middle income countries?
Thanks, Theodore. I think from our sort of perspective in terms of, yeah, it's a tough one. It's very difficult to actually try and create a benchmark between sort of your conventional business methodology and mindset and actually what happens on the ground. It's something where we've tried to certainly create open-mindedness between, in terms of that process, in terms of how we align, impact on the environment, amount of plastic removed from the environment, but also down to impact for individual collectors and sorters of material, and how that's actually impacting them from a social economic point of view. So we spend quite a lot of time on that because for us, we are very focused on empowering women and youth around our programs and our pods. And through that process, we then create monitoring and evaluation methodology with partners and NPOs around us that actually help us with that. And I think also in terms of, it comes down to having quite an agile approach to it and how you assess it, and creating an informative engagement process with the stakeholders and partners that you're working with, because a lot of it is unknown territory, if that makes sense. A lot of people haven't actually worked in a lot of these spaces. We get people calling us quite a lot around, well, how did you solve this problem? How did you do that? And sometimes the answer is as simple as I sat down with the local chief and I listened to him for an hour and he told me what they actually needed and how it should be solved and how the community would benefit from that. And then we created a benchmark standard from that.
Thank you so much for this. I think this is incredibly helpful guidance. I just want to remind the audience that we're going to soon have our time for Q&A, so please post your burning question to our panelists in the Q&A chat. In the meantime, I will end my part of the panel by asking all of the panelists a slightly broader, more zoomed out questions. So I know that we probably have a number of practitioners in the room who have in the past or are thinking about working on similar programs, looking to scale innovations in low and middle income countries. Could you share a specific challenge you faced during the program that you've worked on or your broader experience, and talk us through some of the learnings that you derived from this that you think could really help people who will engage in this space in the future? So any volunteers, please feel free to start. Otherwise, I will pick on someone. Esther, perhaps I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. So I think a lot of I've seen a lot of really interesting examples from the process evaluation report that we also prepared for the Afri-Plastics program as a whole. And I think this is maybe a broader one, but I thought something that I don't feel we talk enough about, and which is the question of, we did mention the need to operate in a space where maybe the infrastructure is not yet there, or is it not at the level where innovators would be able to build on it. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that when that might be the responsibility, and that might be, it might be on somebody else's desk, but funding is missing, or there are implementation challenges. And I think we have seen a lot of examples of how innovators then end up kind of working across the whole value chain, as opposed to maybe in more developed markets, they might be able to focus on a specific area, a specific point of expertise. But what we have seen is very often you really have to start developing infrastructure. This might be developing physical infrastructure, but at the same time developing your own markets, growing your own customers in a way. You might be offering a solution that people don't know they need, and this is something that we have heard. And I think within that, I had a really interesting conversation with a prominent social entrepreneur from Ghana, Bright Simons. And he really highlighted this challenge of how do you avoid mission creep? You want to kind of work on everything. You want to solve everything, but then you also need to stay kind of laser focused on the problem that you're solving. So I think maybe that would be the most interesting kind of takeaway that, you know, I had from this process and from these conversations, of just be aware of these, you know, different forces that are pulling you in different directions, and find out, you know, how can you partner with others so you end up in partnership working across the value chain, but that, you know, allows you and your organization to focus on, you know, the problem that you really want to solve and the area that, you know, you have the most, you know, expertise and passion for.
Thank you, Esther. I think this goal of kind of strengthening the enabling environment is such an interesting conversation in itself, and also how do we actually leverage innovation funding to do so, as well as other interventions. So definitely want to keep the conversation going in that space. Who should I pick on next? I will maybe hand it over to Ijide. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Right. So I would talk about an experience I had and around setting up a digital marketing place for one of the core innovations that we scaled in Nigeria. And so we scaled this innovation, which was a nutrient-dense food product, and it was quite a success. And building on that success, we felt we could set up a digital marketplace, taking the same approach that we took in developing that innovation. And when we did, we realized that adoption of that digital marketing place was very low among farmers, was low among the other value chain actors. And the learning from that was, you know, innovation. It's very important as an expert to know the nature of your innovation and the type of innovation that you are trying to scale. Some innovations require a top-down approach, while others require a bottom-up approach. And because this was a digital technology that would be rolled out across the value chain, adopting a top-down approach was not the best, but rather sitting down with this key end users to know what are their bottlenecks and what could be their pain points in using that technology, and addressing that before trying to scale it. And so it was a lesson for us that you first need to understand the nature and type of innovation you're trying to scale, and look at the various strategies that could help that innovation to scale over.
Thank you so much, Ijide. Isaac, I was wondering if you had some challenges and lessons learned to share with our audience.
Yeah, let me share one challenge that is like peculiar to us in the private sector, especially in the agri sector. So for us in the agri sector in Africa, the agri sector is still very conservative, right? And the adoption of technology and innovation is very slow, which means you need to put in a lot of effort and resources to create the awareness that is needed for that adoption. And this costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. And you need to be able to raise financing in order to do this. However, in Africa, if you're looking to raise funding, all our investors are expecting you to be able to show some significant traction, right? So this introduces this chicken and egg situation where you have the innovation, you know it works, you need to be able to scale it. You need the funding in order to be able to show traction, but those who have to give you money are saying, hey, where's your traction? Show enough traction before we give you any money. And so now this means that for us, we need to, the way we've tried to overcome this is to think about some very unconventional ways to raise funding, which one of the things we have done from our end is to raise like personal funding through like friends and even professional acquaintances. It's not like, it's like, instead of trying to raise $200,000 from one investor, can I raise $1,000 from 30 people who follow my work, who know what I'm doing, who have been able to see that I've built a track record in delivering these solutions and believe in what we are doing enough to give us the money, right? So that is one of the ways we've tried to overcome this challenge. And another challenge in scaling innovation is even not just the innovation in itself, but even the business model, that there's lots of innovation that has to go into developing the business model, because you cannot just, sometimes the business model is not just immediately obvious. And one example for us is the fact that we've had to, when we started trying to scale our grain moisture meters, we realized that just doing a simple, hey, we have moisture meters, come and buy, was not going to work. In fact, even to some extent, bundling did not work, and bundling it with another complementary product did not work. And so we actually had to offer post-harvest management services like drying and threshing. And now those technology solutions that we had, rather than sell it as like a product, we were offering it as a service. And so we could offer like a moisture testing service. Now the process of arriving at what was going to work from a business model point of view, given all of the constraints that you face because of the kind of people you're working with, is a challenge on its own, which requires a lot of like experimentation, a lot of try and error to figure out what works. So those are just two examples that I wanted to share. Over.
Thank you so much, Isaac. We have a question from the audience for yourself and Ijudai. So I will take advantage of this last 2 minutes to maybe see if you can give us a whistle stop of your answer to this. So someone asked, would you share your experiences with integration across the different competing digital technologies that exist in your field of innovation? So wondering if you had any quick perspectives to share on that.
Yeah, let me just share my thoughts. And so when you look at digital technologies in my field, it's broad, right? You have people that are building like payment solutions for farmers to be able to receive payments. You have people that are building like advisory technologies for farmers to be able to receive like weather and other updates. The thing that I notice is that in my industry, a lot of solutions are siloed. You don't have technologies and you don't have solutions talking to each other. You have everybody is building their technology to do one thing or another. But another thing you realize, and I am speaking specifically for the agriculture / agri-tech space, another thing you quickly realize is that the technology, if your strategy is to offer your digital technology as a product, that is probably going to fail, because just the biggest market size in the agricultural value chain, which is smallholder farmers, they're just not. We haven't gotten to the point where farmers are going to be able to pay for like a digital technology first solution, right? And so in the end, your digital technology becomes a tool for you to offer more like efficient traditional products and services in the space. And so that's why we don't see a lot of digital, like a lot of integration in digital technologies in my space. Maybe Judai has like another perspective, but this is just my experience as far as what you have asked is concerned.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. Just to build up on that, from my experience, if we are trying to integrate digital technology to support some of the innovations we have, especially when we're looking at scaling, there are some few criteria that we first try as much as possible to look at. The first is the ease of usage of that technology. How simple is it in terms of operation? We look at the cost of usage of that technology. Will it incur so much cost for the farmers, value chain actors, and all that? We also look at how easy is that technology in terms of integrating it to existing systems. For instance, if the government, maybe the Ministry of Agriculture, has an existing system, can that technology be able to communicate with the system that the government has? And then for some of the mobile apps, we try as much as possible to look at if that app has that offline functionality. If such a functionality exists, it's actually very, very key to us, because you find out that you might be in a place where there could be no internet access, and the need for you to collect data, make use of that technology is quite critical. So some of these functionalities are what we try to look at in the first instance before we integrate this technology to the existing innovations that we have, because that way we have that assurance that it's easier and adoptable for our farmers, value chain actors, and also can be able to provide that sort of integration with the public systems that exist. Over.
Thank you so much, both. I think this whole conversation really brings us back to this theme of, as Oliver was saying, like local is king, customization is key. You need to understand your innovation and who is going to use it. So thank you so much for sharing this perspective. Now, I'm conscious that we're unfortunately running out of time. I would love to throw so many more questions at you, but we have one last question from the audience that I will maybe give Oliver and Gidibo the chance to answer, and then I will give you all a chance to share any final thoughts. So someone asked, how can cultural change be managed when introducing new innovations? So I think that's a very interesting flipped perspective of how do you adopt innovations to new cultures. So if either of you would like to give an answer to this.
Sure, I can answer if you want, Theodore. So basically, cultural changes is a massive thing, or habit change. So, for example, I think the first thing that we learned is when you're going into a new environment or a new sort of area, you've got to be prepared to understand those cultural requirements, and you've got to be able to allow adequate timeline to your model. So, for example, we know that habit change in communities where we work takes up to 18 months from initial engagement. It's not something that can be done overnight. However, what we've also learned is that once you create the right economic impact within a community, the ability for that local community and its culture to adapt to your business model because of reward is very, very rapid. And to give you an example of that, we had a program where we were collecting bottles from grandmothers in communities in rural KwaZulu-Natal, where we were based, and we were running out of stock feed in terms of having sorted and separated plastics to run through the plant for the local operators and the ladies that were running that pod. So they were short on supply. So we decided to engage with the local ladies around what if they would mind taking the lids off the bottles and removing the labels, and we gave them bags to put that into. They asked us, well, why would they do this? We said, well, we'll pay you an extra so many $cents a kilo if you do this. The adaptation then took less than 8 hours. And the following morning, we had everybody arriving with their bags sorted and separated, and obviously asking us to pay them a little bit more money. But it worked perfectly. And as I say, if you fix the problem, the adaptation is overnight.
Thank you so much, Oliver. This is super interesting example. Gidibo, I think I can give you a maximum of 1 minute if you have any perspective on this.
Thank you.
Quite a bit of a challenge, but there you go.
No, I can add on to where Oliver left off. So it's really interesting in terms of cultural shifts and changes. I can give you a quick example. We were supporting a project that was trying to replace cooking stoves, charcoal cooking stoves with non-oil based sort of like solar powered stoves. And the uptake was really slow. And we very soon realized it's a social activity to just fetch firewood for the women in that community, which in turn was actually an economic activity for them. So to just make the shift in terms of the mindset of the community, there was a lot of awareness that had to go into place. And, awareness can be one of the hardest metrics to measure in terms of community shift. But in the end, what is really important is building social shifts or awareness programs that actually build metrics around what is the behavior change that you're trying to achieve. So if you provide awareness only, it does not mean people will actually go back into their community and actually implement the change that they've learned. So it's important to understand the awareness is important, but make sure that you can build in an actionable social change in terms of the behavior of the community that will take on. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gidibo. I think this really takes us back to the question we started with, right? Like, how do we ensure long-term impact? I'm afraid we don't have any more time for questions, but I can maybe ask if any of you has any final thoughts, closing remarks, and then I will hand back over to my colleague, Jonty. Gidibo, over to you.
Thank you. I think it's in line with this last conversation we were having. As you're scaling your innovation, you're building a lot of metrics to try and understand how you can scale and all that. But I think one of the key phrases that we use now is don't let the data scream. So data speaks a certain language and it's telling you something. And if that data continues to tell you something and we don't take action or build metrics around how do we act around these different data pieces, it means we're now pushing that data to scream to us. So let's make sure as we're building innovation systems, we make sure that we are listening to each data piece and we're building action items to those data, even if that means building an action piece that literally says there's no further action needed for this data. That's good enough because it tells you what type of investment you continue to make on that data piece specifically, but how do you now spread out your resources on the data piece that is actually needed to expand, maybe in terms of financial commitment. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think this is actually a really interesting piece of insight to end on. So just being conscious of time, I will now hand back over to Jonty. Thank you so much all for this conversation. I found it super helpful, and to everyone in the room, I hope you found it likewise useful. So Jonty, over to you.
Eudora, thank you so much for all of what you did. I have to say that was really, really interesting listening to everybody and providing all of that enlightened thought. And in some ways, actually wish we'd thought about some of this when we had started our scaling journey, but actually really interesting to add to the learning. So just to say in the final few minutes, if you'd like some more information on the Afri-Plastics challenge, please go to this link and it will be shared with you. If you have any questions or you would like to follow up, please send me an email. And then also, or you can reply to the invite that you were sent for this webinar. We will be sending out in the next few days the report that Esther mentioned, which is all about our experience of Scaling Innovation in LIMC Countries, and focused on using the Afri-Plastics Challenge Strand 1 participants as data. But we'd also like to continue this conversation. We're going to be writing a blog about this webinar. We'd also like to hear your comments and your thoughts from the participants on all of this. I'd like to thank all of the panelists that joined us today. It has been an honor to listen to you and for you to add to this conversation. And I look forward to continuing this conversation more with you in the future. Thank you everybody for attending. Hopefully you've all found it really interesting. Please follow up. If you would like to follow up, please look up any of our panelists on LinkedIn and make connection with them. They've all got really interesting profiles, so it's worth doing that. And please look out for your follow-up email, and we may send you also a questionnaire to give us any feedback on the webinar. Otherwise, all have a really, really good morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to hosting you on the next webinar that ChallengeWorks does. So please look out at it on our LinkedIn profile. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you all.